Welcome to the Starzology Astrology podcast. I'm your host, Alison Price, and I'm here again with my good friend and co-host, Arwynne O'Neill.
Hi, Alison. It's great to be here.
So nice to have you once more. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about Chiron Returns.
Yes.
So first of all, we're going to have a look into what Chiron is and perhaps what it represents, and then we'll move on to the returns.
Yeah. So Chiron it's not a planet. It's a centaur, and it's between the orbits of Saturn and Uranus. It is actually technically a comet.
Yeah,
which is
it's
hilarious.
crazy. Yeah,
and it's got a very unique and erratic orbit, according to Cafe Astrology. So I'm sure NASA agrees, but yeah, it is in the natal chart. It is symbolized by the wounded healer, and this is a centaur. There's a whole wonderful myth, actually, which we can get into in a minute, but it's named for the Greek centaur who was a healer and a teacher. And the irony was that he could heal everyone but himself.
Yeah. That is the nature of Chiron. So I know when I started astrology back in, dare I say, in 1980, Chiron was discovered in 1977. So even back then, we didn't have ephemerises or ephemerides for it.
Right.
So it only came in.
Hot new thing.
It was. It was like
it was the heiress of its
day.
And I mean, still to this day, you have to actually in some software suites or websites, you have to choose to add it, or it's not even included.
Yeah.
And
yeah. Well, anyway.
But it is a super interesting one. And
it is.
Yeah. And it stays in place for quite a while. So It's a nice generational marker as well, I find.
Yeah. So it's an interesting, it's not the first thing you learn in astrology, but it's definitely an interesting planet. So you did talk about a couple of keywords on that, didn't you?
Yeah. So let's just do the little myth, myth background really quickly. So the myth of Chiron begins with parental rejection. This is, I'm actually quoting a little bit here from an article by Dina de Castro, who was a wonderful astrologer. And she has this article about Chiron called The Fight. This is actually about Chiron and Aries, which we'll get into because that's where it has been since 2018 and it will be until 2026. So a lot of people will be getting their Chiron return, and that's around the age, literally the age of 50, apparently 50.7. And it is, she says, the fight for the right to be you. This is her keyword for Chiron and Aries, which I find really interesting. But the myth of Chiron, this is applies to everybody who has Chiron, everybody really.
Yeah.
So the myth of Chiron begins with parental rejection. Chiron was the product of the union of Kronos, otherwise known as Saturn, and a nymph or water spirit named, and I'm going to probably pronounce this wrong, but Philyra.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah. He was born a centaur, and his deformity drove his mother to abandon him. Orphaned for a time, he was later adopted by the god Apollo, and Apollo taught him the arts of healing, music, and prophecy, including astrology. Chiron was able to transcend his rough beginnings by using his wisdom in service, and he engendered reputation not only as a great teacher, but as a healer and an oracle. And he went on to become a renowned mentor. But without this initial wound of rejection by his mother, he would never have been set upon the path of being this wonderful healer. And so Chiron, in everyone's chart, is about where you are wounded and then can help others because
through healing.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, I often find it's a place where you think you're weak.
Yeah. Which
technically you are. But as the years go on, you can overcome these things. But yeah.
It's like not to get it, but okay, so like an alcoholic.
Going off at a tangent now.
I know, like an Alcoholics Anonymous or something like that, where you wouldn't have the leader of the little circle be someone who had never had an addiction. It's always going to be someone who has recovered or is in recovery, as they say. And how else could you help others without having gone through the valley of darkness yourself? So to speak.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting thing, and because Chiron is so small, and as we say, NASA still says it's a comet, which is fine by me. Yeah. It doesn't rule any sign,
right?
So that in itself it weakens it weakens Chiron. It's not a strong thing in most people's charts unless it's particularly well placed. Yeah,
right, well placed, or makes a really strong angle to something. So if it's aspecting something in your chart, then it's gonna. make itself known and felt more.
Yes.
Or if it's in your first house or
exactly.
Something. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so even though what we've said is that Chiron takes 50 years to get around, but it doesn't go around equally.
Right.
So just to give some idea, the transit in Chiron waxing square to its natal position can begin as early as the age of 8 and last up until and continue on until the age 22. So that is a broad area.
Interesting.
The opposition can be between age 22 to 42, any time in that period. And the closing square between the ages of 27 and 45. But the actual conjunction, the full-blown return, is age 49 to 51. So we say 50 years in general. So what's happening is because the orbit is elliptical, which is not even egg-shaped, it's elliptical, it's faster in Libra and slower in Aries. So it just depends where Chiron was when you were born, whether you're going to get your squares earlier or later and your oppositions earlier or later, but you will get your return at age 50. And that's the thing we're going to have a little chat about today. So where is Chiron then at the moment?
Right now, it is in Aries, and it has been since 2018. The actual exact dates, if you're born between these dates, you will have Chiron in Aries. It was April 1st in 1968 to October 18th, 1968. That was when it first went into Aries. So these are the people who will be having their Chiron return in Aries. And then it went back in January 30th, 1969. And it stayed there until May 28th, 1976. And then it dipped back in from October 13th, 1976 to March 28th, 1977. So those are the date ranges we're going to be looking for.
So people who are around age 49, 50, 51-ish or have a Chiron return looming on the horizon, or they're actually living through it at the moment.
Right. And if you were born in late, 1968 anywhere between then and 1973, you will have probably already had it.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So do you want to tell us a little bit more then about Chiron in Aries? Because we're talking about it natally now, are we, at this point?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So Chiron in Aries, these are people who, the wounded ego, basically. This is your desire for freedom, your desire to assert yourself. It is, as Dino De Castro says in this article, it's about the fight to be, for the right to be you. And she tells this personal story about wanting to be in plays and to act and to perform on the stage. And her parents were divorced, and her mother was very disapproving of this and didn't even want to hear about it when she got a part in a play. Wouldn't drive her to school for this, and she had to cancel out of this one performance. And then the following year, she just asked a friend's mother to drive her. And then, from then on, it was all go. But she basically had to, at the age of I think 13 or 14, just decide that, it meant enough to her that she was going to defy her mother or, go, out of bounds and just do this.
Wow.
And, in order to be on stage and to feel like she was expressing her personal ego. And although I did have a wonderful, upbringing with very loving parents, who, were divorced, but very much loving in their own ways and separately, I really do resonate with the idea of that wounded ego, because we all went through puberty. We all, I think probably have, something where you can look at the age of 13, 14. For me, it started at 11, unfortunately, because I was precocious and, dressed in a way that got attention that was not, what other students in my school would have thought was appropriate. And these days you'd say bullied.
And we're saying this because you actually have Chiron in Aries.
This is the point. Yeah. Just turned 50 this year, etc.
Okay. Well.
Yes. But, so I really relate to that whole, because it's not just the, the wounded ego of your parents rejected you or they're suppressing you necessarily. Your ego could be wounded in any number of ways at very formative ages. And I think for me, it was this struggle to be myself despite this sort of peer aggression and oppression and being, told in no uncertain terms that how I was expressing myself was not acceptable at all, to my fellow middle schoolers.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And, it sounds like, oh, it's so long ago, get over it. But I mean, yeah, it really did affect how I expressed myself for quite a while. And yeah, I think that is a thing of Chiron and Aries. It's like the struggle to be yourself despite the world telling you should not be.
Right. Yeah. Right, and because Chiron's been so long in Aries, there are many more people have Chiron in Aries than any other sign. Mm-hmm. And of course, then if we look at your house position they're in the 6th house, that will of course modify everything that's going on, right? Sure. Yeah. But it's interesting because what you're saying is that you have recently had that big birthday.
Yeah.
So having had a quick squiz at your chart here, because this is why we're talking about Chiron returns, particularly at this point, is because you've got one on the horizon. It's bubbling under, coming near in your future. Let's put it that way. And what's happening is you're going to have a tripled hit Chiron return. Mm-hmm. So the first return will be in April 24th, 2024. That will be the very first connection you have. That will be your first Chiron return when Chiron gets back to its exact position. Mm-hmm. It will then move on ahead, and then it retrogrades and comes on back and hits for the second time in the retrograde position in November next year. Mm-hmm. It then continues on retrograding, then stations once more, and then turns around back direct. And only in March 2025 will you have the final Chiron return.
My goodness.
I know. Chiron usually, not always, but usually gives a 3-hit return. Yeah. Whereas Saturn may or may not do 1 or 3, but this is just so further out, it will tend to give a 3-hit return. Yeah. So from April next year to November, you would be under the auspices of the first Chiron return chart. Yeah. And then from the November to the March, you'll be under the second Chiron return chart. But then at March 2025, as it makes its final pass and moves on, that will be your Chiron return chart showing how things are going to be for the next 50 years.
Wow. Amazing. Yeah.
So this is kind of interesting with return charts. You want it at the exact time it comes back to its exact position.
Yeah.
And interestingly, I just want to say this because before your Chiron return, you are the protege.
Right.
And then after your Chiron return, you become the mentor.
Interesting. Yeah.
It's actually a shift from a part of this myth. Yeah. And for women, it actually aligns with menopause as well. Mm-hmm. And also coming into having grandchildren where you can become the mentor to the grandchildren at this kind of age group.
Well, I'll just have to settle for being a mentor to friends and
whoever, But in general, that's you get to that age group, and this is part of that. We all go through it at around age 50. Now, there's a fabulous astrologer in Toronto called Julie Simmons, and she runs an astrology group called the Elders. And you have to have had your Chiron return to be a member of this group.
Amazing.
So, of course, if you're not 50, you're not part of this astrology group and you can't join it.
Right.
But she was a different type of astrologer, or she is a different type of astrologer. She also had a group for the Venus in Virgos group, which was one that I could participate with. And she ran different groups rather than just a general free-for-all astrology get-together. She has specific groups coming together so there can be focused learning through related experiences. And she's doing her research that way. Yeah. So let me ask you, how do you feel? Are you feeling this Chiron return coming forward? Are you feeling flashbacks to, or not really?
I mean, I think I've talked about, obviously, my search for work and being sort of set adrift.
It's 6th house.
Exactly. Chiron in the 6th house, set adrift a couple of years ago. I was employed a couple of years ago, but I was very unhappy and eventually was let go, and along with a lot of other people.
Yes.
And have been looking for work and being periodically employed on contract basis and
between engagements.
And I'm engaged at the moment, which is awesome, but it's a 3-month thing and it may or may not continue. And so there's this uncertainty. And there's this uncertainty that as someone who is really a Virgo, but also with Chiron in the 6th house, I really am defined very much by what I do on a day-to-day basis, I find. And I think some people would take the opportunity to, be between contracts and go, oh, this is amazing. I have all these creative projects that I can do. Not me. No, it's so weird. I didn't do anything creative the whole time. I was between engagements for a few months, except for this podcast, which is, awesome. I mean, I rehashed a few of my creative projects I had from before, but really what I did was look for work.
Right.
And get outside and exercise because it was summer and it was amazing.
Right.
Which, of course, health is health and the physical is also in the 6th house.
That's right.
And it's interesting because when Chiron went into Aries in 2018, that is when I decided to get on this whole fitness kick and, cut out.
I've never seen you so fit.
Yeah.
I mean, when I first met you, you were a bit of a couch potato.
I was, for sure. And a video game player and and I ate lots and lots of gummy candy.
Yeah.
Which sounds bizarre, but I probably had more of an addiction to candy than most 12-year-old boys. And sugar's not your friend.
All right.
Unfortunately.
So it's interesting how this is coming, that we can relate, particularly in your case, that the Chiron's in the 6th house, and it has to do with your daily activities, your work, and how you feel about it.
Yeah, and it really does affect my ego and how I feel about myself. It's some people could just, it's my job. It's not, whatever. But I really do take it to heart.
Yes.
Not being wanted by a company or by my employer or by whomever I'm in service to, which sounds, I know how gross that sounds, but I really do like to feel needed and
so we can look
all those Virgo words, 6th house words.
So, honestly, we can look to next year, and the first hit's going to be at April 20, call it April, give or take. It's going to be during April where this is going to come to a head. And what it really unfolds during that month, and particularly around the 24th, is going to, and it may technically relate to your work, having it, not having it, or having too much, or whatever it is. And then that has a smaller cycle to November, where situations that you perhaps felt were in hand will, under the retrograde, shift once more.
Yeah.
Until we actually get through to that March 2025, where whatever unfolds in that month will be what is set then for this Chiron effect on your chart. It's because you're going to get a 3 hit. We're bubbling under, and we are very close to. I mean, you're within orb already for this conjunction. We're just nailing it right down to the date because we're good Virgos and we like to do that. But this is a cycle that is likely to still perpetuate for a little while.
Yeah.
So if I was your astrologer, I'd be saying bank the money and stop,
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And I have been. Oh my gosh.
Because this is a Chiron return is not always, when it's past, it's fine, but you're going through it can be a challenge. And we want to have, but knowing it's coming helps as well.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I hope you see it that way.
I absolutely do. And it's neat because the last couple of years have been so challenging in this whole realm. And it's nice to actually just know that it's kind of got an end on the horizon.
Yes.
That in one way or another, in about a year, it should be resolved in some way.
Yes. And there'll be a change in how you actually spend your days.
Yeah.
When you come out of this to what they were when you went in.
Yeah.
Because, of course, once you've got over this Chiron return, 5 years later, you're looking at the Saturn return down the barrel of a gun.
Right.
So but I always believe with astrology, it's awareness is key.
Yeah.
That knowing that there is, and I don't want to say uncertainty, but there's still shifts happening.
Yeah.
And flexibility will be called in for you to navigate these, especially in your daily life.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
it's interesting. It's not just the work thing, but as we were saying, the health and my days used to be a very different prospect. I mean, there was more time for creative pursuits, but at the same time, there was a lot of downtime of just, sitting in front of the TV. And
I mean, you tell me that you take the stairs. Now, let me tell our listeners what that means. That means she walks up 22 flights of stairs. 23 flights of stairs, multiple times a day.
6.
To burn off the frustrations.
6 just to stay in shape, honestly.
Just to stay in shape.
Literally, it's a very...
The thought of...
It is a very, very aesthetic and superficial thing. I want to be in good shape. I want to be able to eat,
take the
eat
stairs
and drink and be merry. to some degree, and I have modified my diet a great deal. I've stopped eating a lot of sugar. I used to just pile sugar into my coffee, eat candy.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And I very rarely have desserts these days. And I have just this monk fruit powder stuff that I put in my coffee. And other than that, it's, just.
Yeah. So there you are readdressing your health, and you will probably come out of this period fitter than you were when you went in.
Oh, for sure. I'm already in way better shape than I spent my entire 30s.
Yeah.
Like,
it's, you don't look your age, and, you're fit as a fiddle. I mean, I could not, the thought of, the other night when the elevators were down, I waited in the lobby for an hour for the guy to fix the elevator, because I could not walk up 20 flights. They'd be carrying me out on a stretcher, And I look to you with admiration that you do this on your daily trot up the stairs, nimbly, like a young gazelle.
Well, it's really funny because
you should video it.
Yes, I've taken a few pictures. I'll take a picture and send it for the podcast. But it was funny. Several years ago, we lived in a different apartment, and there was a flood. And I came home, and there was literally water pouring off of the balcony of the 3rd floor and just raining down into the front of the building. And apparently the flood had started on the 6th floor. We lived on the 9th, and the elevators were out for 6 weeks. And when you live on the 9th floor and there's no elevator, you really think hard when you come home from work. Because back in the day, I went to work and I would come home and think, okay, what do we need? Because I'm not coming back out until I have to go to work tomorrow.
Oh, my Lord.
Yeah, and my friend was like, just think about how great shape you'll be in after 6 weeks. And it never failed to just make me feel unhealthy and awful. I would get to the 9th floor, 9, I think these days, like, that's hilarious. But I would get to the 9th floor and I'd be panting, and I would feel like I was dying, pouring sweat.
Yes.
And now I purposely and willfully take the stairs.
And spring up like a young gazelle. Yeah.
Well, there's still sweating and panting involved.
But still, it's not something, what I'm saying is that this is likely to, maybe you'll be running it up and doing the CN Tower run next time.
Oh, I would totally do that. Yeah. You'd have to go to Toronto, though. So.
or whatever, or to Seattle Tower do.
Yeah, I've heard of that. Nobody ever tells me about these things in time, but I've heard that there are these neat things where you can volunteer, and the challenge is to run up some skyscraper staircase. And I'm like, why don't they tell me like a couple days ahead? I would totally do that.
Yeah, you could do the tallest building here in Vancouver. It's the Shangri-La, right?
Easy. That's like 2 times what I do.
And this is a woman who's 50. Yeah, I think it's brilliant. So it's not all bad news.
No, exactly.
But it's
for anyone who's younger than me, start now.
Don't let it go.
No. Yeah. Start now.
Keep it.
Yeah. So not to just be me, but Chiron and Aries. Aries is all about me. But there are tons of people right now who have a Chiron return, either having just wrapped up or is on the horizon. And with Chiron and Aries, as I'm going to quote again the Stina DeCastro article, she says, Aries is a sign of self-focus, desire, and passion. Chiron and Aries is inviting us all to face down our fears so that we can grow strong in defense of our right to passionately pursue our desires and, most importantly, to be ourselves. And she has some writing prompts for journaling and for questions about self-reflection that you can ask yourself and write about to help you get through your Chiron return. And they might be good for anybody, really. But,
so this sounds great. So let's hear some of these journaling prompts then.
Yeah, totally. So question number 1, what passion have I been afraid to follow? Question number 2, what was a trait in me that my parents labeled as negative? Question number 3, how might this label continue to block me from following my passion? Question number 4, how can I reframe this label as a strength? And question number 5, how can I use this strength to get where I want to go?
Well, those are quite good questions, aren't they? Yeah. And I imagine one has to give a bit of thought to these answers.
For sure.
So for our listeners who are approaching their Chiron returns, these questions can be a good starting point to give some idea. And self-reflection is the thing, isn't it?
Absolutely. And the transit for most people, for anyone that has it in Aries, it will be probably going back and forth the way we've talked about mine, because it does spend quite a while in Aries. And so this transit overall will last for about like a year and a half, the amount of time that it will really be affecting you. So this is a long transit.
It is
similar to the Saturn return
in
its length of time that it affects you, and it's a good time for deciding what kind of person you want to be for the second half of your life. Assuming we're all going to be centenarians,
of course.
Springing up the stairs like young gazelles and whatnot.
Young gazelles, yeah. So it just shows you that what can be done.
Yeah, totally.
So I think those are great reflections. Have you worked on those yourself, or something you'll be working on
today?
It'll be something you can work on in the next couple of months during the midst of your Chiron return.
Yeah, definitely.
And maybe we can come back and circle back round again in 12 months, 14 months' time to see how things have shifted for you, because you are a living guinea pig virtually for this Chiron return that's coming up on you, and of course it affects everyone, but differently.
And it's one of those things where we can definitely talk about when Chiron goes into Taurus in 2026. This will be affecting tons of people, and it's just another interesting sort of thing that we can revisit on a constant basis.
It's one of those things when you get to a certain age and you hit your Chiron return. Yeah. Great. Yeah. So from our listeners' point of view, if you have, if you're under 50, you've still got a Chiron return coming up. You only get really one in your lifetime. Yeah. And if you're over 50, it's already happened. Yeah. So if you have an interesting Chiron return story, do write to us at starzology@gmail.com and tell us what went down in your Chiron return. We'd be interested to hear about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing. It's at a time of your life where frequently, particularly for women, the kids are off your hands. You've got time on your hands. You can do your things now and do what you want to do. So it's always a good time.
And there's that menopause thing, which, I know.
We just mentioned it in passing.
None of us like to talk about it.
But it's a measurement.
It's certainly not one of those things where I think previous generations it was this looming horrible thing, and I think for some generations now it's like woohoo, yay!
I know. Moving on.
Goodness.
Moving on. Yeah, that's great. Okay, well, if our listeners, if you've found value in this episode, please do consider sharing it with anybody who may be interested.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you, Arwynne, for being with us here again. And we will see you next time.
Thank you. See you next time.
Thanks so much for getting this far through the episode. I just want to take a moment to tell you about the two main options of my astrology services. So the first one is coaching. If you are an aspiring astrologer, and by that I mean someone who's perhaps a hobbyist astrologer or someone who's learning astrology or a student, or you've got a few books and you've been doing it for a while, but perhaps you need a little bit of help to bring it all together, then maybe getting some astrological coaching from me would be the answer for you. The astrology coaching I offer is a 1-hour session on Zoom, and it's tailored to answer your particular questions. For example, if you have issues with natal chart readings, we can go there, or if you're having problems working with your forecasting, we can go there. Or even basic astrology stuff, or even getting yourself organized for your astrology business. The idea is that astrological coaching will answer your particular questions. It's tailored specifically to you and where you are in your astrological journey. And I'm happy to help you out with some guidance about how you can get going, what to focus on, and what to dismiss. So that would be the astrological coaching for people trying to learn astrology. The second astrological service I offer is consultations. So this is for someone who perhaps doesn't know anything about astrology, but they just want to have their chart read or get their chart done. Call it what you will. So once more, this is a 1-hour consultation over Zoom. I will interpret your chart, tell you about the main features, tell you about where the energy is flowing, and all the rest of what is entailed in a thorough natal chart interpretation. I can also add in some forecasting in there too, bearing in mind we only have 1 hour. So just in summary, I've got coaching for people who want to learn astrology, and I've got consultations for those who want to get an astrology reading done. I'm Alison Price from Starzology.com. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.